I can't live free, if I can't live with the same respect as the next man, I don't want to be here. Because God has cursed me to see what life should be like.
In a world where fame shines brighter than conviction, staying true to your faith can be a tough act, especially in Hollywood. The glitz, the pressure, the promise of stardom. It's no wonder some actors find themselves drifting from their spiritual roots in pursuit of the spotlight. While many celebrities manage to balance belief and fame, others quietly traded one for the other somewhere along the way. From childhood church kids to gospel singers turned movie stars, here are 20 black actors who traded faith for fame in Hollywood. 1. Sammy Davis, Jr. Sammy Davis Jr.'s story unfolds like this. A young boy growing up in Harlem, singing his heart out in church, never imagining he'd one day be part of the legendary Rat Pack. Born into a Christian family, Sammy started his entertainment career when he was just 3 years old, performing with his father and uncle in the Will Maston Trio. But here's where things get interesting. As Sammy's career took off like a rocket ship in the 1940s and 50s, he found himself rubbing shoulders with some pretty big names in Hollywood. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, the whole gang. And somewhere along the way, around 1954, Sammy made a decision that raised quite a few eyebrows. He converted to Judaism. Now, this wasn't just a casual Sunday decision. After surviving a serious car accident that cost him his left eye, Sammy started reading about Judaism and felt drawn to it. He said it gave him a sense of belonging and understanding. But folks back home weren't exactly throwing him a parade. Many in the black community felt like he was turning his back on his roots, choosing what seemed like a more Hollywood-friendly path. Sammy's lifestyle certainly didn't help quiet the whispers. The man was living it up, gambling in Vegas, partying with the biggest stars, and making headlines for all sorts of reasons. His marriages, particularly to white actress Mae Britt in 1960, stirred up even more controversy in a time when interracial relationships were still taboo. The wild part? Sammy never really abandoned his Christian upbringing completely. He would still reference gospel music and Christian themes in his performances. It was like he was trying to keep one foot in each world, but Hollywood's bright lights seemed to be winning the tug-of-war. 2. Whitney Houston. Now here's a story that will make your heart sing and break at the same time. Whitney Elizabeth Houston grew up in Newark, New Jersey, in a house where gospel music wasn't just played. It was lived, breathed, and practically served for breakfast. Her mama, Sissy Houston, was a gospel legend in her own right, and little Whitney was practically born with a microphone in her hand. She started singing in the New Hope Baptist Church choir when she was just 11 years old. Can you imagine hearing that voice echo through those church halls? The congregation probably got chills every Sunday. Whitney's early performances were all about praising the Lord. She'd sing songs like "Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah" with such power and emotion that people swore they could see angels dancing in the rafters. Her cousin Dionne Warwick and godmother Aretha Franklin were already making waves in the music world, but they kept their gospel roots close to their hearts. Then came 1985, and everything changed. Whitney's debut album hit the scene like lightning, and suddenly she wasn't just the preacher's daughter from Newark anymore. She was America's sweetheart, the voice of a generation. Songs like "I Want to Dance with Somebody" and "How Will I Know" were playing on every radio station from coast to coast. But as Whitney's star rose higher and higher, something interesting started happening. The gospel influences that once dominated her music began to fade into the background. Sure, she would still belt out "I Will Always Love You" with all the soul of a Sunday morning service, but the spiritual message that once guided her art wasn't quite as front and center anymore. The pressures of pop stardom seemed to pull Whitney further from those church pew days. The industry wanted her to be glamorous, sexy, mainstream, not necessarily the wholesome gospel girl from Newark. And while Whitney never completely turned her back on her faith, many folks noticed that her relationship with religion became more complicated as her career skyrocketed and personal struggles mounted. 3. Eddie Murphy. Get ready to laugh because Eddie Murphy's journey from church boy to comedy king is quite the adventure. Born in Brooklyn and raised in Roosevelt, New York, Eddie wasn't always the wisecracking, boundary-pushing comedian we know and love today. Little Eddie was actually a pretty religious kid who sang in his church choir. Can you picture it? That famous Eddie Murphy smile beaming from the choir loft while he sang hymns on Sunday mornings. His family took their faith seriously, and young Eddie seemed right at home in that spiritual environment. But Eddie had something else brewing inside him, a natural gift for making people laugh. He started doing impressions and comedy routines as a teenager, and by the time he was 19, he landed a spot on Saturday Night Live in 1980. That's when everything went from church giggles to national belly laughs. Eddie's comedy style was raw, edgy, and often pushed boundaries that his church upbringing probably wouldn't have approved of. Characters like Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood and his famous stand-up specials like Raw and Delirious were packed with language and content that was about as far from Sunday school as you could get. Then came the movies, 48 Hours, Trading Places, and of course, Beverly Hills Cop. Eddie was making millions laugh, but his comedy often relied on language and situations that were pretty different from those choir boy days. The church influences that shaped his early years seemed to take a backseat to Hollywood success. The funny thing is, Eddie never really spoke badly about his religious upbringing. He just seemed to file it away as part of his past while he focused on making people laugh in ways that definitely wouldn't fly during Sunday service. It was like he put his church boy persona in a box and let his comedy career run wild in a completely different direction. 4. Denzel Washington. Denzel Washington grew up as the son of a Pentecostal preacher in Mount Vernon, New York. His father, Reverend Denzel Hayes Washington Sr., led the congregation at Pentecostal Church of God in Christ, and young Denzel was right there in the front row, soaking up all that spiritual guidance. You'd think with a name like his and a father in the pulpit, Denzel might have been destined for the ministry himself. His childhood was filled with church services, Bible study, and all the foundations you'd expect from a preacher's kid. The man was practically raised on Scripture and Sunday sermons. But somewhere along the way, the bright lights of Broadway and Hollywood started calling Denzel's name. After studying journalism at Fordham University, he caught the acting bug and decided to chase his dreams on the stage and screen. His breakthrough came with the TV series St. Elsewhere in the 1980s, and then movies like Cry Freedom and Glory started making him a household name. Now, here's what makes Denzel's story interesting. He never really abandoned his faith. In fact, he still talks about spirituality and even funded the construction of a new church for his father's congregation. But many people noticed that instead of following in Daddy's footsteps to the pulpit, Denzel chose the spotlight of Hollywood instead. Some folks whispered that he picked fame over faith, choosing movie sets over ministry. But Denzel always maintained that his acting was just another way of serving, bringing important stories to life, playing characters like Malcolm X in Malcolm X, or the inspiring coach in Remember the Titans. The interesting part is watching Denzel balance both worlds. He would give interviews talking about prayer and faith, but he was also building this massive movie career that took him further and further from any possibility of becoming Reverend Washington Jr. It was like he found a way to honor his upbringing while still chasing those Hollywood dreams that were calling his name. 5. Jamie Foxx. Jamie Foxx's story starts in a place you might not expect, behind a piano in church. Born Eric Marlin Bishop in Terrell, Texas, Jamie was raised by his grandmother, who made sure he knew his way around both a church pew and a piano bench. Little Jamie wasn't just attending church, he was practically running the music program. He played piano, sang in the choir, and even considered becoming a minister at one point. Can you imagine? Instead of Gold Digger and Blame It, we might have gotten Sunday morning sermons from Reverend Bishop. His grandmother, Estelle Marie Talley, was the real driving force behind his religious upbringing. She made sure Jamie understood the importance of faith and gave him a solid foundation in gospel music. Those church skills served him well. The boy could play piano like nobody's business and had a voice that could make the congregation shout, "Hallelujah." But Jamie had other talents brewing too. He was funny, really funny. He started doing comedy at open mic nights and eventually landed a spot on the TV show In Living Color in the 1990s. That's when Eric Bishop became Jamie Foxx, and his career started taking off in directions that were pretty far from the church organ. The transformation was pretty dramatic. Jamie went from playing gospel music on Sunday mornings to doing raunchy comedy sketches and later starring in movies like Any Given Sunday and A Lie. His comedy specials were filled with language and content that definitely wouldn't fly during church service. Then came the music career, but not the gospel kind his grandmother probably had in mind. Jamie started making R&B and hip-hop music, collaborating with artists like Kanye West on songs that were more about Saturday night than Sunday morning. His album Unpredictable was all about romance and partying, not exactly the hymns he used to play. The wild part is that Jamie never completely lost those musical skills he learned in church. You can still hear gospel influences in his voice, and he's incredibly talented on the piano. But instead of using those gifts for ministry like he once considered, he used them to become an entertainment superstar. It was like he took his church training and gave it a complete Hollywood makeover. 6. Tina Turner. Buckle up for this one because Tina Turner's journey from Baptist church to Buddhist chants is quite the spiritual adventure. Born Anna Mae Bullock in Nutbush, Tennessee, Tina grew up in a world where Baptist church services were the center of community life. Young Anna Mae was singing in church before she could probably even spell her name properly. The Baptist church in rural Tennessee wasn't just a place of worship. It was where kids learned to sing, where communities gathered, and where faith was as natural as breathing. Tina's powerful voice was probably shaking those church windows from an early age. But then came Ike Turner, and everything changed. When Anna Mae became Tina Turner in the late 1950s, she entered a world that was pretty different from those Sunday morning services. The Ike and Tina Turner Review was all about energy, excitement, and entertainment that had more to do with Saturday night than Sunday morning. During her years with Ike, Tina's life became complicated in ways that probably had her questioning a lot of things, including her faith. The music was incredible, songs like River Deep Mountain High and Proud Mary. But her personal life was troubled, and that Baptist foundation seemed less and less relevant to her daily reality. The real change came in the 1970s when Tina discovered Buddhism through a friend. Now this wasn't just a casual interest. Tina dove headfirst into Buddhist practices, particularly Nichiren Buddhism. She started chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo instead of singing Amazing Grace, and meditation became more important than Sunday services. When Tina made her incredible comeback in the 1980s with songs like What's Love Got to Do With It and Private Dancer, she was pretty open about how Buddhism had changed her life. She credited her new faith with giving her strength to leave Ike and rebuild her career. The transformation was complete. Tina had gone from Baptist church services in Tennessee to Buddhist meditation practices, from gospel influences to a completely different spiritual path. It wasn't that she became anti-Christian. She just found something that worked better for her life and career. Her new faith seemed to fit better with the international superstar lifestyle she was building. 7. Kanye West. Where do we even start with Kanye? This man's relationship with faith has been more up and down than a roller coaster at Six Flags. Kanye Omari West grew up in Chicago with a mother who made sure he knew his way around church, but his journey with faith has been, well, let's just say it's been complicated. Young Kanye was exposed to Christian values through his mother, Donda West, who was an English professor and a strong woman of faith. But even in his early music career, Kanye was mixing gospel samples with rap beats in ways that had some church folks raising their eyebrows. Songs like Jesus Walks showed he wasn't afraid to talk about faith, but he was doing it his way. Then came the fame, and boy, did Kanye's relationship with faith get complicated. Albums like Graduation and 808s and Heartbreak were more focused on success, relationships, and personal struggles than spiritual matters. His lifestyle became more about red carpets and award shows than Sunday services. But here's where it gets really interesting. Kanye has always been conflicted about faith and fame. One minute, he's rapping about material success, and the next, he's sampling gospel choirs. Albums like Jesus had religious imagery mixed with content that definitely wouldn't make it into any church hymnal. Then, plot twist. In 2019, Kanye suddenly declared he was born again and started his Sunday service performances. These weren't your typical church services. They were more like gospel-influenced concerts with Kanye leading choir performances of his own songs mixed with traditional hymns. He even released an album called Jesus is King. But even his born-again phase seemed to have Hollywood written all over it. The Sunday services became exclusive events attended by celebrities, and Kanye's approach to faith seemed as much about performance and branding as it was about genuine spiritual practice. 8. Halle Berry. Halle Berry's story is a bit different from some of the others. It's less about dramatic conversion and more about a quiet drift away from her religious roots. Born in Cleveland, Ohio, Halle grew up in a household where Christian values were important, but her journey to Hollywood stardom seemed to gradually pull her away from those early influences. Young Halle was raised with Christian principles by her mother, Judith Ann, who worked hard to provide stability after Halle's father left the family. Church wasn't necessarily the center of their lives, but Christian values definitely played a role in Halle's upbringing. She learned about faith, morality, and community in ways that shaped her early years. But Halle had dreams that extended far beyond Sunday services. She started competing in beauty pageants as a teenager and eventually became Miss Teen All-American in 1985 and Miss Ohio USA in 1986. From there, it was a pretty straight path to modeling and then acting, with each step taking her further from those Ohio church influences. Her breakthrough came with TV shows like Living Dolls and movies like Boomerang in the early 1990s. As Halle's career took off, faith and religion seemed to become less central to her public persona. She was more focused on building her acting career and dealing with the pressures of Hollywood than discussing spiritual matters. Movies like Monsters Ball, which won her an Oscar, and action films like the X-Men series were about as far from church-appropriate content as you could get. Halle was playing complex, often edgy characters that required her to explore themes and situations that were pretty different from Sunday school lessons. What's interesting about Halle's story is that she didn't really rebel against her Christian upbringing or convert to something else. She just seemed to let it fade into the background as her career became her primary focus. In interviews, she rarely discusses religion or spirituality, focusing instead on her work, her family, and her activism. It's like her faith became a private matter, if it remained important at all. Hollywood success seemed to fill the space that religion might have occupied in someone else's life, and Halle appeared perfectly comfortable with that arrangement. 9. Lauryn Hill. Lauryn Hill's journey is probably one of the most complex on this list because her music was always deeply spiritual, but maybe not in the way her early church influences intended. Born in East Orange, New Jersey, Lauryn grew up in a household where faith and music went hand in hand. Young Lauryn was singing in church and learning about gospel music from an early age. Her musical talents were obvious, and the church environment gave her a foundation in both spiritual themes and vocal techniques that would serve her throughout her career. She understood the power of music to move people's souls. She learned that in church. But Lauryn's path to fame came through hip-hop, not hymns. As part of the Fugees in the 1990s, she was rapping and singing about social issues, relationships, and life in ways that borrowed from her spiritual background but weren't exactly church appropriate. Songs like "Killing Me Softly" showed her incredible vocal ability, but the Fugees were definitely more about street credibility than Sunday services. Then came The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill in 1998, and this is where things get really interesting. This album was deeply spiritual and philosophical, but it wasn't traditional Christian music. Lauryn was exploring themes of love, identity, and social justice through a lens that combined her Christian upbringing with other influences, including Rastafarianism and various philosophical traditions. Songs like "Everything Is Everything" and "X Factor" were spiritually powerful, but in ways that probably wouldn't fit into a traditional church service. Lauryn was using her gospel-trained voice and spiritual sensibilities to create music that was more about personal enlightenment than organized religion. As her fame grew, Lauryn seemed to distance herself from both mainstream Christianity and mainstream entertainment. She became more reclusive, more focused on alternative spiritual practices, and less interested in the commercial success that Hollywood typically rewards. It was like she took her spiritual foundation and built something completely different with it. Her later years have been marked by sporadic performances and a reputation for being unpredictable, as if the pressures of fame conflicted with her spiritual seeking in ways that made traditional success less appealing. 10. Chris Tucker. Chris Tucker's story might be the most relatable of all. Born in Atlanta, Georgia, Chris grew up in a religious household where faith was important, and he initially tried to balance his comedy career with his spiritual values in ways that were pretty admirable. Young Chris was raised with strong Christian values, and when he first started making it big in comedy, he actually tried to keep his material clean. He was the guy who didn't want to curse in his stand-up routines because it went against his religious upbringing. In a world where most comedians were pushing boundaries with language and content, Chris was trying to get laughs while staying true to his faith. His early movie roles reflected this approach too. In films like House Party 3, Chris was funny without being offensive, keeping his comedy within bounds that wouldn't make his grandmother ashamed at church on Sunday. But then came Friday in 1995, and everything started to change. Playing Smokey alongside Ice Cube, Chris delivered a performance that was hilarious, but definitely included language and content that wouldn't fly during Sunday service. The movie was a huge hit, and suddenly Chris was known for a character that was pretty far from his religious roots. The real shift came with the Rush Hour movies, starting in 1998. As Detective James Carter, Chris was cursing, getting into wild situations, and generally behaving in ways that were entertaining but not exactly Sunday school appropriate. The success of these films, they made hundreds of millions of dollars, seemed to pull Chris further from his early attempts to keep his career and faith aligned. By the time Rush Hour 2 and Rush Hour 3 came around, Chris was fully embracing the Hollywood lifestyle that came with being an action comedy star. The religious considerations that once influenced his career choices seemed to take a back seat to the massive success and financial rewards that came with mainstream Hollywood fame. 11. Aretha Franklin. Aretha Louise. Franklin didn't just stumble into music, she practically grew up breathing it in the pews of her father's church. Reverend Clarence LaVaughn. Franklin wasn't your average preacher. He was a celebrity minister whose sermons were so popular they got recorded and sold nationwide. Little Aretha started singing gospel at New Bethel Baptist Church in Detroit when she was just a kid, and by age 14, she had already recorded her first gospel album. The girl had pipes that could make angels weep. But here's where things get interesting. In 1960, at age 18, Aretha made a decision that would change everything. She signed with Columbia Records to sing secular music. Her father actually supported this move, believing her talent deserved a bigger stage. However, Columbia didn't quite know what to do with her powerhouse voice, trying to mold her into a jazz chanteuse when she was clearly destined for something much bigger. The real transformation happened when she jumped ship to Atlantic Records in 1967. That's when producer Jerry Wexler took her back to her gospel roots, but gave them a secular twist. Songs like I Never Loved a Man, The Way I Love You, and Respect turned her into the undisputed Queen of Soul practically overnight. The irony? Her most secular music was deeply rooted in the gospel techniques she learned in church. Throughout her career, Aretha never completely abandoned her faith, but the demands of fame definitely pulled her in different directions. She dealt with personal struggles, multiple marriages, and the pressures of being a black woman in a predominantly white industry. Her relationship with organized religion became complicated, especially as her lifestyle didn't always align with traditional church expectations. The fascinating part about Aretha is that she never fully traded her faith for fame. She more like remixed it. She recorded gospel albums throughout her career, including Amazing Grace in 1972, which became the best-selling gospel album of all time. She sang at Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral and Barack Obama's inauguration. Her voice carried the spirit of the church even when she was singing about very earthly matters. 12. Tupac Shakur. Born to Black Panther activist Afeni Shakur, young Tupac was exposed to various spiritual beliefs from early on. In Baltimore, he studied poetry, jazz, and ballet at art school. Early interviews show a thoughtful young man quoting the Bible and discussing God. But Hollywood had different plans. When he joined Digital Underground, then signed with Interscope Records, the industry loved his thug image because it sold records. Those who knew him described a much more spiritual person than his public persona suggested. Songs like Dear Mama showed his reflective side, but tracks like Hit 'Em Up revealed the darker persona fame demanded. Tupac often spoke about feeling torn between spiritual beliefs and the violent imagery expected of him. His later music on Me Against the World showed increasing spiritual themes as he grappled with mortality and redemption. 13. Will Smith. Will Smith grew up Baptist in Philadelphia, where church attendance was Sunday routine. His grandmother was particularly religious, and young Will spent time hearing Bible stories and gospel music. He was more interested in making people laugh than preaching sermons. His early rap career with DJ Jazzy Jeff featured notably clean content, partly rooted in church upbringing. This wholesome image served him well on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Hollywood success came fast with movies like Bad Boys and Independence Day. Will admitted that the entertainment industry shaped his worldview more than religion did. He explored different spiritual philosophies, including Scientology, briefly. His marriage to Jada Pinkett Smith also influenced his religious journey. He's honest about this evolution, never pretending to be the same church kid from Philadelphia. 14. Queen Latifah. Dana Owens grew up in East Newark with church being important but not overwhelming. Her mother made sure she participated in church choir, where young Dana discovered her love for performing and learned to command audiences. Her breakthrough album All Hail the Queen established her as a pioneering female rapper. Songs like Ladies First showed commitment to social issues that aligned with Christian values, but career demands made regular church attendance difficult. As she transitioned to acting in Set It Off, Chicago, and Hairspray, her roles sometimes conflicted with traditional church teachings. She's been open about personal life in ways some religious communities found challenging. But Latifah never abandoned spirituality. She believes in God, just not necessarily within organized religion. 15. Beyoncé. Beyoncé grew up in Houston, where church was a way of life. She started singing in choir at St. John's United Methodist Church at 7. Her vocal coach was a church music director, and early performances were gospel songs showcasing her incredible range. When Destiny's Child exploded internationally, fame demands reshaped her church relationship. Videos, costumes, and performances featured themes far from traditional gospel values. Songs like Bootylicious were musically amazing, but definitely not church material. As a solo artist, albums like Dangerously in Love showcased her as confident and independent, an image requiring distance from conservative church expectations. However, she never completely abandoned spirituality. Songs like Halo contained spiritual themes, and Lemonade included gospel influences, showing faith roots remained part of her artistic DNA. 16. Snoop Dogg. Calvin Broadus started in a Christian household in Long Beach. His mother Beverly made sure he attended church and participated in choir. He was quite good, with a smooth voice handling hymns and R&B equally well. But Long Beach's emerging West Coast rap scene proved more appealing than Sunday service. When he connected with Dr. Dre for The Chronic, church days seemed ancient history. The Snoop persona celebrated partying and marijuana use that would horrify Sunday school teachers. For decades, Snoop seemed to have completely traded religious background for rap stardom. His lifestyle and explicit lyrics put him firmly in secular entertainment. But recently, he circled back to gospel roots, releasing Bible of Love in 2018 and talking about his mother's prayers, never stopping. 17. Ray Charles. Ray Charles Robinson grew up poor and blind in rural Georgia and Florida, finding refuge in a Baptist church where he learned piano. Church musicians recognized his talent and nurtured it despite his blindness. By teens, Ray was skilled at both gospel and secular music. The turning point came when he pursued secular music professionally in the late 1940s. His family and church weren't thrilled, especially when his lifestyle began reflecting entertainment industry demands. What made Ray revolutionary was bringing gospel techniques into secular music. Songs like I Got a Woman were essentially gospel with secular lyrics, and the church community was not having it. Many considered it sacrilegious. His struggles with addiction and multiple relationships made conventional religious observance impossible. He chose career over church, though gospel remained central to his art. 18. John legend John Stevens grew up in Springfield, Ohio, where church attendance was mandatory. His grandmother made sure he understood both musical and spiritual aspects of church life. He played piano for services as a kid, developing skills that made him sought after in entertainment. At University of Pennsylvania, he explored secular music more seriously, forming hip-hop group counterparts. The breakthrough came connecting with Kanye West, who gave him the John Legend name. Songs like Ordinary People showcased ability to write about relationships rather than religious themes. As careers took off, organized religion became more distant. He married Chrissy Teigen, and their lifestyle reflects Hollywood glamour more than church values. His music rarely references religious themes directly, though his style still carries gospel influences from his church training. 19. Chadwick Boseman. Chadwick grew up in Anderson, South Carolina, where the church was a community center. His family attended Welfare Baptist Church, where he participated in activities and directed plays. He learned that entertainment could serve spiritual purposes beyond just making people laugh. At Howard University, he explored theater beyond religious themes, developing passion for African American stories that were meaningful but not necessarily religious. His breakthrough roles as Jackie Robinson in 42, James Brown in Get On Up, and Thurgood Marshall in Marshall showed commitment to portraying important historical figures. Black Panther made him a global superstar. T'Challa represented African pride and social responsibility, themes resonating with his upbringing but not explicitly religious. Throughout his career, he maintained private spirituality expressed through role choices rather than traditional religious activities. 20. Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson's religious relationship was probably the most complicated in entertainment history. Born into a Jehovah's Witness family in Gary, Indiana, he grew up in a strict faith, very different from mainstream Christianity. Witnesses don't celebrate birthdays or Christmas and have specific beliefs about entertainment. As Jackson 5 became famous, the split between show business and religious observance became difficult. Michael's solo career with Off the Wall and Thriller made contradictions impossible to ignore. Music videos like Thriller were considered inappropriate by his religious community. The breaking point came in the mid-1980s when Michael officially distanced himself from Jehovah's Witnesses. Their strict entertainment rules and disapproval of his performances made continued membership impossible. Family members remaining in faith had to limit association with him. Post-Witnesses years showed someone searching for spiritual meaning outside organized religion. Songs like Man in the Mirror reflected belief in higher purposes and spiritual transformation, just not within childhood faith confines. He often spoke about feeling lonely, partly from losing religious community structure. Fame may fade, but the choices these actors made left lasting impressions. Whether they find their way back to faith or keep chasing the spotlight, their journeys are a reminder of what's gained and lost on the road to Hollywood.